Good afternoon to all, and thank you for joining us virtually for this important event. I am Moshe Gruscott, Rabbi of Kehilath Israel Synagogue in Overland Park. We at KI are honored to have our shul member, Ida Kolkin, this year's event chair, give tonight's main remarks. And I welcome you to our program commemorating 78 years since the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the 58th anniversary of the dedication of the memorial to the 6 million, and 76 years since the end of World War II. We recommend that everyone keep their screen on speaker view as opposed to gallery view. Speaker view is where you primarily see whoever it is who's actually speaking prominently on your screen instead of all the participants all at once. So you can find the view option on the top right-hand corner of your screen. In addition, following my remarks, a video will play. We recommend that while the video is playing, for all participants to turn off their cameras in order to improve internet bandwidth. Cameras may then be turned on again during the live closing remarks. As I make all these technical announcements related to the virtual forum on which we find ourselves, it only highlights for me how different the world now is since the end of World War II, and just how much time has passed since then. If you would have tried to explain to people living during that time the manner in which we'd be commemorating this event today, they would have surely reacted with amazement and astonishment. That should only stir us to feel an even greater sense of responsibility to ensure that the Shoah remains properly remembered, recognized, and commemorated, and that we never allow it to recede from communal or national memory, even and especially with the passage of so much time. In the early 1950s, when the Shoah was still all too fresh in people's memory, there was a debate in the Orthodox community to which I belong if this newly instituted day of Yom Hashoah should be adopted, or if perhaps instead the Shoah should be commemorated on Tisha B'Av in the summer, the day on which the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. Tisha B'Av is the saddest day of the Jewish year, and historically Jews combined the memory of other tragedies, such as the Crusades and the pogroms, into the observance of Tisha B'Av. One of the scholarly voices advocating for the acceptance of Yom Hashoah was Rabbi Tibor Stern, who was the last chief rabbi of Kansas City until the early 1950s. Rabbi Stern invoked a passage in the Talmud, which states that the death of a single righteous person is an even more weighty tragedy than the burning of the temple, the house of the Lord, which we commemorate on Tisha B'Av. And based on this passage, Rabbi Stern argued that the Shoah, during which 6 million righteous Jewish souls were killed, certainly does warrant its own day of mourning, separate from Tisha B'Av. It was that wise view of Rabbi Stern and those who agreed with him that won the day here in Kansas City, and thankfully in so many communities around the world as well. As Jews, we commemorate the tragedy of past horrors, while also looking forward to the future day described in Isaiah 10:9. Lo yareu v'lo yashchisu b'chol har kodshi, ki malah haaretz dea es Adonai kamayim layam nechasim. They shall neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mount, for the land shall be full of knowledge of the Lord, as the water covers the seabed. Amen. As I mentioned, we will now be showing a video. The video that follows includes the traditional candle lighting ceremony, remarks by Ida Kolkin, this year's chair, and the traditional musical elements of our usual program. Once again, we recommend turning your camera off during this video in order to improve internet bandwidth. The service will conclude with live remarks and prayer from Rabbi Doug Alpert, and everyone's encouraged to turn your camera back on for those live remarks. We now proceed to the video.
Hello, I'm Fran Sternberg, daughter of Holocaust survivors Bessie Fishman Glazer of blessed memory and Abraham Glazer, and it's my honor to introduce one of the most traditional and meaningful parts of our memorial service, the lighting of 6 candles representing the 6 million Jewish victims. Throughout the world, in similar ceremonies, candles are lit in remembrance of the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered in the Holocaust. The memory of the Holocaust reaches across our community, touching each of us. Today, representatives of 6 special groups will light candles: Holocaust survivors, children of Holocaust survivors, grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, youth program participants, Jewish war veterans, and the greater Kansas City community. Gitla Doppelt will light the first candle on behalf of the survivors of the Holocaust. Max Javinsky, son of Holocaust survivors Esther and Henry Javinsky, both of blessed memory, will light the second candle on behalf of the second generation. Ethan Pack, grandson of Holocaust survivors Maria and Fred Javinsky, both of blessed memory, will light the third candle on behalf of the third generation. Kayla Fink, participant in the Together We Remember program and great-granddaughter of Maria and Fred Javinsky, will light the fourth candle, recognizing young people who are committed to community service and civic engagement. Rodney Minkin of the Jewish War Veterans will light the fifth candle, honoring the men and women who have served or continue to serve in our nation's armed forces. Amanda Morgan, chair of the board of the Jewish Federation of Greater Kansas City, will light the sixth candle on behalf of the entire community. We invite everyone watching to light their own candle of remembrance.
My name is Ida Colkin. I'm the youngest of 3 children born to Fred and Maria Javinsky of blessed memory, and this is their story. My parents were from a small city in Poland called Wojciech. It was about 62 miles west of Krakow. My father was the youngest of 7 born to Moishe Javinsky and Kyla Yakimowicz. Starting with the oldest child, their names were Shmuel Hirsch, Rivka, Yankel, Fatal, Chaim, Pola, and my father Ephraim, or more commonly called Froyam. The family business was manufacturing and selling of textile goods. In 1918, at the age of 4, my father lost his father. Shmuel Hirsch and Chaim took charge of the running of the family business. His mother was not involved in the day-to-day operations of the business. She had a heart condition, and those days, the treatment for the heart was to rest. My mother was one of 3 children born to Shlomo Brown and Rivka Rosenberg. The oldest child's name was David Lezer. Next, my mother Malka Hana, and the youngest was Shmuel Yitzchak. My mother's family business was a general store. My grandfather fought in World War I. He was injured in battle and received the equivalent of a Purple Heart. His compensation for his injuries was a special license to sell cigarettes and alcohol. They also had trucks to transport whatever they needed and would rent space on the trucks for other merchants to do their importing and exporting of merchandise. Sometimes they would collect goose down and feathers from the surrounding farms, then transport those loads to other cities where the product would be shipped to manufacturers. On the way back, they would organize pickups of supplies for other merchants for a fee. My mother's home was also a large storefront on one of the main streets. What that means is the part of the house that faced the street was set up like a store, and the back of the structure was their home. My mother said it was a large home with 4 bedrooms and indoor running water and plumbing. My grandmother ran the store. They would sell things like coffee, sugar, flour, and chocolate. Some days they would make baked goods and other kinds of ready food to sell. Both sides of my parents' family were religious. My father's grandfather was Joseph HaKohen Chavinsky. He was the dean of the local Jewish community and Gabbai of the Vodyslav synagogue for about 40 years. Family would refer to him as Yossel Flam. In Yiddish, Yosef is commonly known as Yossel, and Flam means flame, like the flame from a fire. That referred to the large red birthmark on his face. My mother's father was also a religious man, a Pichov Hasid. He was also a member of Agaduth Israel. It was a political party of Hasidic Jews in Poland. Both families had good, lucrative businesses and were known and respected in Vodyslav. As most young people of that time, they did normal things. They went to school. They gathered with their friends to do homework or socialize. Friday afternoon, they would shut down their businesses and prepare for Shabbat. The next day, Saturday, they would go to synagogue and pray. That was their life. My mother's oldest brother was friends with my father. As friends do, they would hang out together. My father was 6 years older than my mother. I think it was no big secret that my dad was, well, let's say, kind of sweet on my mom. But if you think about it, when you're 15, 16 years old, someone 21, 22 years old is someone that is really not of any interest to you. I'm sure inside her heart, she felt flattered, but she was young. And in her mind, relationships and courtships were decided for you. So she really didn't want to have anything to do with them. She wasn't interested. In the middle of August 1939, my mother said she recalled a conversation between her father and his business partner by the name of Yusuk Gondrovich. Yusuk was not Jewish. He and my father were in the German army and fought together in World War I. After my grandfather recovered from his injuries, he and my grandmother stayed in Hanover, Germany for a short time. They decided to go back to Vodyslav. By this time, Yusuk was a high-ranking officer of the RK. The RK was a Polish military group that did not like anyone. They did not like Russians. They did not like Germans. They just liked Poles. Yusuk and my grandfather were talking about the impending threat of the German invasion and the ability of the Polish army to fight them. Yusuk seemed confident in the Polish army. He was obviously very wrong. It was September 1st, 1939. The German army started riding into Vodyslav. There were motorcycles, and most of them had sidecars. The soldiers in the sidecars had rifles. As they were coming into the city, they were shooting at people, killing whoever was standing on the street. My mother watched from inside the window of her family's store. People were running. They were being shot. They were being shot on the streets and the sidewalks as she looked out. On that day, my father was one of those people that got shot. What I was told was my father was crossing a farm that was on the road to Vodyslav. Again, the soldiers were shooting at anything that moved. They shot at my father and he fell to the ground. The bullet had ripped through the front part of his abdomen, slicing open his stomach. As he laid there, he could see the soldiers were stopping their vehicles and getting out, most likely to make sure that he was dead and to steal what they could. At that moment, it started to rain and rain hard. The soldiers retreated back to their vehicles and continued on their way, leaving my father there. Several hours later, the farmer found my father laying in his field. He was still alive, but seriously hurt. He asked the farmer to take him to a hospital in a neighboring town. My father told him he had family there. So the farmer helped my dad into his horse and buggy and took him to the hospital. The truth is, the family my father spoke of really were not family. It was his former fiance's family. He called off the engagement some time before, but he was still friends with her brother, and he helped my father with his injuries. As a child, I would see this long diagonal indentation across my father's belly. It really didn't faze me until I was much older and could comprehend what kind of a wound could cause that kind of a scar. He must have been sliced in half. The scar was at least 12, 13 inches long. My father's recovery was very long and extremely difficult. It kept him away from Wojtyslaw for over a year. The Germans spread out through the area and took control of everything. Late December 1939, a small convoy of trucks came into town. The Gestapo came into my grandmother's store and started taking everything. The store had bulk items, so my grandmother started to take a little bit of coffee and tea to save for themselves. The man in the black uniform pointed a gun at my grandmother and instructed her to leave it alone and walk away. At that moment, my mother, being young and maybe naive to what was actually happening, went and stood in front of the man. She asked him in German, "Why don't you let her take a little bit? It's for the children." He slapped her twice across the face with some type of leather strap. She said for days her face was swollen and had cuts in it from the thick, stiff leather. In January 1940, Nazis had created the ghetto in Wojtyslaw. They forced relocation of Jewish population, but brought people from other cities too. There were people from Yudjizov and Lodz. There were about 200 small dwellings consisting of 1 or 2 floors with 1 or 2 rooms. Most of the buildings were like mud and wood structures. By June 1942, there were over 3,800 people in the Wojtyslaw ghetto. Young men were taken out of the ghetto daily to work in Sarzizov, to build the train station and the railroad tracks. They took people from the ghetto daily to do work. My mother was part of a group that was sent to the river to line the banks with stones. It went on that way for several months. Then the beginning of 1941, they started taking the men away in trucks. That is when they took my mother's 2 brothers. Where they were taken, nobody knew. Later, they found out they were taken to the Francisco Carmina work camp. About 6 months later, my mother's brother Shmuel had run away from the camp. Her other brother, David, she did not see for another 2 years. In 1941, typhus was in Wojtyslaw. Those who contracted the illness were sent to the ghetto. In August of 1941, the administrator of the ghetto gave orders to vaccinate Jews in the ghetto. My mother was chosen along with 8 other girls to vaccinate people and take care of the sick. Part of their job was if someone infected with typhus should die, these girls would have to bury them. That went on for months and months. When the job was done, every Friday night after that, the Germans would come and take one of the 9 girls from their home. The next morning, Saturday morning, they would find her dead in front of her house. Every week, another girl. My mother was obviously becoming worried. She had a non-Jewish friend who was able to make her false papers. She was blonde with green eyes and spoke excellent German, so she could pull off not looking Jewish. And so she had her Red Cross armband from working with the typhus patients. So she would put the Red Cross armband over her Star of David armband. And with non-Jewish papers and the Red Cross armband, she was able to get out of the ghetto and basically hide as best she could. She was able to get herself to Krakow. There, she tried to work some odd jobs, like in a restaurant or hospital, again, trying to stay under the radar. After a bit, she became concerned for her parents. So with nerves of steel, my mother hitched a ride on a German truck. He drove her all the way back to Wojtyslaw, never knowing she was Jewish. It was the fall of 1942. Yusuf Gondrovich came to my mother and told her the Auszüger was coming, a cleanup of whoever was left. He told her she needed to run, get away. My mother told him it was okay. She had a place to hide. Her family was close with the mayor's wife. She had offered to help hide my mother and my grandmother. Yusuf became very upset. He explained to my mother that wasn't a good idea, that if push came to shove, the mayor's wife will have no loyalties to her. My mother asked him what to do. He explained to her that he was already making arrangements for them to hide and to be ready to go. A day after that, my father came to my mother and told her the same thing. He told her that on Sunday was going to be the final cleanup of the Jews of Wojtyslaw, and they were all going to Treblinka. That Sunday was also Yom Kippur. My father said he had a plan. He told my mother that they should get married. He said that it would be safer because he was to understand that young married couples had a better chance to survive than single people, and that they should run away. So with that information in hand, my mother, scared and confused, went to her mother and asked her what she should do. My grandmother, seeing that this is an opportunity for her daughter to survive, she said to my mother that she should do whatever she wanted to do. No one knows what's going to happen, and marrying my father could save her life. So she went back to my father and said she would marry him, but her mother was also going to run away with them. Now at this point, they needed three things to make this all work: someone with authority to marry them, a witness, and a ring. My mother had an uncle who was a shochet, a kosher butcher, but someone with authority, someone that could give them chuppah kedusha. My mother also asked her best friend, the Burgermeister's sister, to be their witness. She agreed. My father went in search of a ring. He was able to buy one for 5 zlotys. In searching for the ring, he divulged to a few friends his plan. So with that information, some of them decided to join my parents. That night, September 20th, 1942, Erev Yom Kippur, 4 couples got married. Seeing that finding one ring was hard enough, all 4 couples used the same ring. Only 2 of those couples survived the war. Then a couple of hours later, my mother met Yusuf. She told him now there were 3. He didn't understand. He asked her who was the 3rd. She said it was Froim Javinsky. He looked at her confused. My mother just looked at him and said, "He is my husband. We got married yesterday." So at that point, my father, mother, and grandmother were on the run. Her brothers were in the Sarsisko Carmina work camp. Her father believed to be murdered in Treblinka. She had gotten married. It was Yom Kippur, and they were running for their lives. They arrived at the Vladstev Cholevsky farm. Yusuf made arrangements for them to get there by hiding in the bed of a horse-drawn wagon covered up by a load of hay. There was no place prepared for them to hide when they arrived. So my father and the farmers started to dig out the barn floor. Basically, they dug a 15 by 10 by 5 foot tall pit. My father then went to try and find his mother and any other family members. He was going to bring them back to the farm. My brother's father, Yankel, was married to Paula Zalsman. The basement of the Zalsman's family home was very big. They built a fake wall in the basement with a hole in it, with a hole in the floor to crawl underneath the wall. A Polish policeman somehow knew Jews were hiding in the basement and notified the Gestapo. Hiding there was my father's mother, brother Yankel and his wife and their 2 children, his sister Rivka and her husband. All of these family members and others, a total of 36 people, were found hiding in the town. They were all taken to a field, lined up, and shot. My father was hiding in the background, watching what was happening and could do nothing about it. He watched them murder his mother. Yusuk found other family members and brought them to the bunker. At one point in time, there were 9 people in that bunker. My father, my mother, my grandmother, my mother's brother, David, her other brother, Shmuel, and his girlfriend, and my father's sister, Pola, with her 2 young boys. Yusuk was paying the farmer, and he had threatened the farmer to keep quiet. Yusuk was a high-ranking official in the Arka, and the farmer knew it. Yusuk hoped that that fear was enough to keep my family safe, at least for a little while. As time went by, having all these extra people meant they needed more money. My mother's brother David had an idea. Before the war, he had stored some clothes and heavy winter coats with a widow woman on another farm. He went to retrieve the clothes and asked her if she knew anyone would want to buy them. She said her brother was interested and would buy them. The brother paid David, and David left and started going back to the farm. He would try to stay out of sight and go to cemeteries. Why? Because Germans were afraid to go into cemeteries. As he was running through, someone came up from behind a gravestone, beat him, and killed him. My mother thought it was the widow's brother. David left on a Saturday night. He did not return on Sunday or on Monday. So the farmer went into town to see if he could find out something. He came back with the news that they found someone dead in the cemetery. They did not know for sure it was David. But then the farmer said the gossip was that the man was wearing a checkered jacket. David was wearing a checkered jacket. Also hiding with them was my father's sister Paula with her 2 boys. The boys were sometimes playing in the field. Boys are boys. At 8 and 11 years old, it was hard to keep them down. The farmer became very concerned and scared. He said the boys have to go. Yusuk had made arrangements for them to hide on another farm close by. They left at night, but never arrived at the other farm. Somewhere on the way, they were caught and never heard from again. No one really knows exactly what happened. While my parents were in the bunker, the Gestapo came to the farm twice to look for Jews. They put boards over the top of the hole with dirt and hay on top of that. The Gestapo would go through the barn and jab their bayonets into the ground. If the point met with some resistance, they would move on. The boards over the bunker gave them the protection they needed, so the soldiers just kept moving. They were at the Cholzeski farm for almost 2 years. Near the end of the war, the farmer and his wife wanted everyone to go. The farmer was getting nervous. The previous Sunday, someone point blank asked him if he was hiding Jews. The man had noticed that the farmer was doing repairs on his home with bricks. Bricks were an expensive building material and was surprised that he could afford it. The farmer explained he had been collecting bricks here and there as scrap until he had enough to do the repairs. Just the suspicion alone that he might be hiding Jews put everyone at great risk. The next night, they decided to leave and head towards the town of Ozlovska. My mother's brother knew a farmer by the name of Bendinsky who had done business with them in the past. They had no idea if he was still there or if he'd be willing to hide them. They dressed in farm clothes. The men tried to make themselves look like women. They carried baskets, trying to look like field and farm workers. They were stopped once by the Germans. They asked the group where they were going. My mother answered him in German, home. He asked her, "What are you carrying?" She replied, "Eggs." He didn't care about eggs, so he told them all to go to hell and left them alone. The Badinskys did take them in and hide them in the root cellar under the house. They were there for several months. It was there that they received the news of liberation. On the final night in the root cellar of the Badinskys' farm, they could hear planes flying overhead. My mother said it sounded like hundreds and hundreds of planes. The farmer heard that there were Allied forces in the area, and that the end of the war was close at hand. They wanted the farmer to go and buy a newspaper, but an illiterate farmer buying a newspaper in town could bring suspicion. But then the farmer came to them and said he had seen the troops and they were speaking Russian. It was true. The Allies had arrived. So after being in hiding for 27 months, on the morning of January 18th, 1945, my mother, father, grandmother, and uncle came out of the hole in the ground. In 2016, my brother took us, a bunch of family members, to Wojtyslaw. And I just would like to show you a few pictures from that. This is the square where my father's business was. This is what is left of the Wojtyslaw synagogue. This is a picture of all of us that went, and we're standing in front of a soccer field. But this was the field that they shot the 36 people that they left in the town. And this is where my father watched his mother get shot. But now it's a soccer field. A few more pictures of Wojtyslaw. This is basically the first cousins. We're missing two. We're missing my cousin Monique, who's in Toronto, Canada, and Max Javinsky, who lives here in Kansas City. They didn't attend the trip. This is the farm that my parents hid in. This is a picture of all of us standing in what is left of the barn. That's the hole that they were in. And this is actually what is left of the barn. In this picture, if I'll bring it up close, if you can see, you can kind of see the walls on the floor. That was the original floor height of the barn. It has filled up with dirt quite a bit since, but that's where the barn sat. This was my mother's brother, Shmuel, and his girlfriend, Hanka. She survived. This is a picture of my parents. This is all Wojtyslaw during the war. This is a picture of my father before the war. This is my mother's mother, my grandmother, Rivka Brown, Shlomo Brown, her brother David, and her brother Shmuel. This picture, we don't know whose house or what event it was or anything like that. But if you look, this is my father. This gentleman here, his name is Shmuel Hirsch. He was the oldest of the family. The little boy behind him is his son, Moshe, and now we call him Monique. He lives in Toronto, Canada. He's 91 years old, and he's my oldest first cousin. This is Yanko, and this is Fatal. Picture of my father. This is Yosef HaKohen Chedinsky. And if you can see a little darker here, that was the red birthmark on his face. This was Shmuel Hirsch Chedinsky. Yanko. This is my grandmother on my father's side, Kyla Javinsky. This was his sister, Rivka, and this is his brother, Faltel, and his wife, Brucha, and their baby. When they arrived in Kansas City, they found help with a Jewish organization called the Benjamin Clinic. It operates today as Jewish Family and Children's Services under the umbrella of the Jewish Federation. The Benjamin Clinic helped them with housing, employment, and learning English. They worked hard, they made a family, and they lived here the rest of their lives. They helped and support the Jewish community. Now, by no means is this the whole story. Every day, some unforeseen horror happened. I am sure there are more stories about my family that were too painful for my parents to remember and talk about. I thank God my parents survived. They came to a new country and started a new life. My parents had the kind of story that is considered the American dream. But don't be fooled. It was not easy. They worked long and hard. They made a beautiful family and life for themselves. They were a power couple, always dressed with style and grace. It took time for me to become an adult to truly understand what they went through and how much they achieved. In my eyes, they were nothing less than amazing.
Sag nicht keinmal, dass du gehst dem letzten Weg. Aus Himmeln bleien auf verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird nach unser Haus gewend geschah. Das Wetter beugt an uns ertrott, wir sind da. Kommen wird nach unser Haus gewend geschah. Das Wetter beugt an uns ertrott, wir sind da. Never say that you are going your last way, though lead-filled skies above blot out the blue of day. The hour for which we long will certainly appear. The earth shall thunder neath our tread that we are here. The hour for which we long will certainly appear. The earth shall thunder neath our tread that we are here. For us the morning sun will radiate the day, and the enemy and past will fade away. But should the dawn delay or sunrise wait too long, then let all future generations sing this song. But should the dawn delay or sunrise wait too long, then let all future generations sing this song. Keinmal aus du gehst dem letzten Weg. Aus Himmeln bleien auf verstellen neue Tag. Kommen werden nach unser Haus gewend geschah. Das Wetter beugt an uns ertrott, wir sind da. Kommen werden nach unser Haus gewend geschah. Das Wetter beugt an uns ertrott, wir sind da. El Malei Rachamim Shochen Pamaromim Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina B'ma'alot Kedoshim u'Tohorim Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim L'nishmot Kol Achenu B'nei Yisrael Shenitbechu B'Shoah Anashim Nashim V'Tayim ושנשרפו ושנהרגו, שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם בגן עדן, תהא מנוחתם. ענה בעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפך לעולמים, וצרור בצרחים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר
I'm Rabbi Doug Alpert of Congregation Kol Ami, and it's my honor to participate in this important commemoration for Yom Hashoah, the Hagavurah. And for that, I offer my thanks to the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, to Jessica and Shelley. Before reciting Mourner's Kaddish, Yatom, a couple of brief comments. I think Mourner's Kaddish, like the mission of Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, is about both honoring and preserving memory and our hope for a better future. Kaddish Yatom, literally orphans Kaddish, is appropriate in that I think in some manner we are all orphans from the Shoah, orphans for what we lost, orphans to what we could have been, all of which should only give us greater resolve to honor the memory of the 6 million precious souls in how we live our lives as Jews today. But as we honor memory, Mourner's Kaddish is also a prayer of hope for the future. And if you read it closely, it's couched in the future tense. May God's majesty be revealed in our lifetime. May there be abundant peace, and may God bring us peace. Midwest Center for Holocaust Education teaches us to remember the lessons of the Holocaust so that in the future we will eradicate indifference, intolerance, and genocide for us as Jews and for everyone everywhere in the world. To that I say, Ken Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will. As we recite Kaddish Yatom, I know that in the Zoom world in which we are now living, different shuls have different ways of approaching a minyan via Zoom, so I urge you to follow the practice that is yours and your shul. Kaddish Yatom. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah ve'alma divrach yiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayeh d'chol beit Yisrael Bagala v'zman kari v'imru, amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'olam l'omei maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudisha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru, amen. Oseh Shalom B'mromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru, amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn. And let us say, amen. As we conclude our program, I thank you all for on this day remembering.